I'm going to start off with some traditional prayers to our lineage teachers, and then we'll get started into the main topic. So, Ganji tuje ne zonne tawa tamje pambecher dambe chune donze pago tamte la chazalo chuku kundu zambo gomba I dorji semba garab dorji ta sheri singe pardo jinate dedan data dedan majun data dusumgi zojin jube lama la so de ganri to karin nimbe go yota gonja gawa cheta de nimbo donze bebe na japa kunjin chuki jabo la so de sheja kunjin jile sheja kunjin rola jete de teme wo so yangro Doctor was a long enough in Najaba, Jimmy Limpe Shabas over the Reton Jabo Jene Jinable, Gombelon Pobe 30 draw, Londo Chutu Janson on Joe. Mibon Jambayana over the woman Chuji Ingi Potran and Dusum Sanje Kunging Woni. Ransan Chukumans and Dunde Petawa Lame Shabas over the Nelo Topa Cheor Chichilo, Dazo Droelona, Chula Jur. Oh, Ganda Chuchu Tongo Jadena, Deja Tomar Joa Gang, Sita, Dinder Dami Chuchi Chabana, Nimber the Batata Dershi, Lai Ketan Lutan Nushinki, Drum Data Me, Kenangi, Draw, Kungi Draki Ginepa, Tamje K the Dagi Chutendo. Alright, so the topic of tonight's talk is the Three Noble Principles. And if any of you are totally new to this, there's going to be some kind of foreign jargon involved in this. So I'll try my best to accommodate everyone if anyone's totally new. So I'm going to start off just reading through the text, and as we go, I'll just try and explain the context of this. So the Three Noble Principles are three principles that would apply to any level of practice, whether that is attending a teaching like this, or doing any kind of meditation practice, or engaging in any kind of retreat. And so those three principles are something that you do to prepare to start into whatever the practice may be, some way of doing the main practice, and then something to do to conclude the practice so that you have some good like bookends. So you start well, you operate well, and then you conclude well, something like that. And these three principles and these kind of beginning, middle, and end principles are going to ensure that the practices that you do are as effective as they could be and are as effective as they are said to be by the tradition. So, in the Buddhist tradition, there's a lot of high praises of these paths of practice that they can lead you to enlightenment, even enlightenment in one lifetime, help you overcome all states of suffering, temporary and ultimate, all this kind of stuff. And that is true, at least I believe that that's true. However, there are a lot of things that you might do wrong, or that you might, just absent-mindedly not pay attention to, that will make those practices not as effective as they are meant to be or as they are praised to be. So these are three principles which will ensure that whatever kind of practice you do is as effective as it could be, basically. So the first of those is the generation of bodhicitta. So it is the intention for practice. And in the Mahayana Buddhist practices, Mahayana Buddhism is one of the two main kind of lineages or traditions of Buddhist practice, so in the Mahayana tradition, bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, is kind of the primary motivation for every practice. And that is the intention not just to free yourself, but the intention to free all sentient beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment. So the first of those three is to basically generate and develop that as your intention for whatever the practice is that you're engaging with. And we'll get into more specifics about that and why you might want to do that, what would happen if you did or didn't do that in a second. I'm just going to give a little introduction. So the second of those is called the non-referential state in the main practice. And so what that means, that can actually have a few different levels of meaning that we'll find out when we get into the main part of this text. But that could mean something as simple as that you're entirely single-pointedly focused on the task at hand, whatever that is. So for example, if you were attending a lecture, that you're not playing with your phone, you're not thinking about what you need to do after the lecture, you're not thinking about what was happening in your day before the lecture, but you're entirely present and focused on listening and being attentive. And in the context of a meditation practice, it would carry that same meaning, like that you are entirely focused on whatever that practice is, whether that is a calm abiding practice, an insight meditation, a deity practice, a mantra recitation, whatever that case may be, that you're entirely focused upon that. So that's maybe like the most simple explanation of what the so-called non-referential state in the main practice could mean. that could mean practicing within the state of a view of perfectly realizing the nature of reality. And we'll come into what that might mean when we get into the main text. And then finally, the conclusion is to conclude the practice with dedications and aspirations. And so that another aspect of this bodhicitta practice is that you start with this intention to liberate all beings, and in the end, you have kind of this intention that carries forth that whatever good, whatever merit, whatever virtue may have come of doing these practices or of listening to a lecture, you kind of dedicate that or use that as a power or a force of your aspiration, that may this become the cause for the benefit of all beings, for their liberation from suffering and their ultimate attainment of Buddhahood. So these three aspects or three principles carry some specific functions, and we'll get into the main text to find out more about that. So this is a text that was written by one of my teachers in India. His name is Jimmy Namgyal Rinpoche, and you can look on the internet and you will not find anything about him probably, because he's a very simple, incredible teacher, but he doesn't speak English, and he will only teach even Westerners if they speak Tibetan. He won't even teach through a translator. He's stubborn and old school, and anyway, that's his style. But he wrote this text, but he didn't exactly write this text. You know, you'll see in the colophon that he basically took sections of other texts that talked about this topic and compiled them into a more brief text, because you don't find a lot of short text just on this topic, but you find this topic talked about in a lot of other big books. So he basically extracted sections from some other books, like The Words of My Perfect Teacher by Patrul Rinpoche, and the Notes to the Word of My Perfect Teacher by Khenpo Ngakchung or Khenpo Ngawang Pelsang, and kind of gathered them into a more brief text so that you could just, talk about one specific topic, like speak about this on its own, not having to read this whole book or these other whole books. So the text begins, the Great Omniscient One. Often you might see the phrase, the Great Omniscient One, in Tibetan Buddhist texts, and they won't tell you who that is, but that always refers to Longchenpa. So Longchenpa is one of the great masters of the Nyingmapa tradition, the early translation school, of which Namchak is kind of a sub-lineage. So he was an incredible, great master of the early translation school tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And so he said, this is a quote from him, "Particularly it is important for traversing the path of liberation for the powerful virtues of the Mahayana to be embraced by the three aspects: the preparation of generating bodhicitta, the non-referential state in the main body of practice, and the dedication in the end." The preparation of generating bodhicitta, which embraces one's roots of virtue with method, has two aspects or two meanings. The first is compassion directed to sentient beings. The latter is wisdom directed to perfect enlightenment. So this is kind of letting you know the difference between bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, and mere compassion. So compassion is an attitude or an intention, or it could be a meditation, which is focusing on wishing sentient beings to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. But just that alone doesn't constitute bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, because the mind of enlightenment has to have that aspect of compassion, of wishing for beings to be free of suffering, but also wishing for them to attain perfect enlightenment. So it has to have both aspects. So that's what common explanation for bodhicitta is: the bodhicitta endowed with two aspects or two meanings, that is, compassion directed to sentient beings and wisdom directed at perfect enlightenment. So goes on to say, first of all, sentient beings who exist wherever space pervades, of all those beings, not one has not been our parents. So this is something that some of you may find difficult to stomach, or maybe find totally illogical or ridiculous, so we can talk about that. According to a lot of Buddhist traditions, and particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, they take infinite past and future lives as just a working basis. Like, everyone just assumes that that's true. So from that context, what they mean to say that everyone has been your parents is that if there are infinite past lives, you're infinitely connected to everyone, in good or bad ways. But they're particularly trying to emphasize in the good way, that like you should feel affection towards these other beings who have served as your parents and cared for you and nurtured you in the past. We can talk about some other ways of talking about the equality of all sentient beings, because I know that for a lot of people that logic doesn't really click, or it may just seem like a total abstraction, or it may just seem like, well, I don't really believe in past and future lives anyway, so this reasoning doesn't really work for me. But I'm just going to go with that for now, and then I'm going to come back and talk about that in a second. So let's just move on with what's being said here. So it says, and this is another thing that might be a little hard to swallow, when they were our parents, like our parents now, they were only kind. This is another thing that's showing the very Tibetan source of this, with some kind of sense of filial piety. And a lot of people in the West have a lot of problem with their family and their parents, and they don't feel like they were very kind, and they have trauma and complex relationships and so forth. I've even had students who have brought that exact point up to teachers who are speaking from this traditional perspective. And there are some different ways that they answer that. And so from one side, they'll say, well, they did give you life, so hopefully you're happy to be alive, But also to think about it from the perspective, it's not necessarily about you and your situation now, but just to kind of think about the nurturing care of like a mother for her child, of nurturing them with their breast milk and raising them and protecting them from the heat and cold and all of that, that even just that, like keeping you alive through your early years, is like a great debt of gratitude. And that's the way they explain this. So we'll talk about that from another perspective in a minute. So now it gets to, okay, so there are all these beings, and the first point of why they say all of that is because they want you to feel like equally positive or equally ingratiated to all living beings. That's the reason for talking about that. So a lot of times if you hear teachings about the four immeasurables or the four boundless thoughts, they'll start you with equanimity. And the way that traditional texts establish that there's this equality of all beings is that they're not just equal in a neutral way, but that they're all equal in you feeling some sense of gratitude towards them by showing that they have been your mother in past lives or your parents in past lives or something like that. But in the West, I find that reasoning is a little bit hard to swallow for a lot of people. So we do try and talk about it in some different ways, so we'll come around to that. I feel like I've said that 3 times, so let me just say that right now. So there are a few different ways, and this is going to talk about it right here, is essentially that from the perspective that everyone wants to be happy and no one wants to suffer, everyone's equal. Even people who think they enjoy pain, they're doing that because somehow that's their sense of gratification is based in that. So everyone actually wants some sense of happiness or satisfaction, and no one really wants to suffer. But people don't know what's going to actually make them happy and what's actually going to make them suffer. So the text goes on here, even though they wish for happiness, they don't know its causes, what to accept and reject in terms of abandoning the 10 non-virtues or practicing the 10 virtues. And even if they do know that, they don't have the time, they aren't interested, or they fall under the power of procrastination. So what this is saying is that essentially, if you want to be happy, you should do good things. You should think good thoughts. If you want to be unhappy, then you should do harmful things and you should think harmful thoughts and give in to all of your negative emotions. And I think a lot of people, what it's saying here is that they don't understand the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering, so they mix all that up. So they think that they want happiness, and in fully giving way to all of their desire, they become obsessed with sex or drugs or eating unhealthily or having all kinds of bad habits or giving way to their anger. And somehow they think that if they can just get back at that person who did them wrong, that that's going to make them happy. But that's actually, all of those things are actually the causes of suffering, and they are feeding more into your future experience of suffering. So what it's saying here is that all beings are equal in wanting happiness, not wanting suffering, but not really understanding what's going to make them happy and what's going to make them suffer. And if you want to go even further with this kind of like equality thing, in the deeper teachings about not just karma, but about like how beings became kind of ignorant in the first place, then we talk about this kind of fundamental ignorance, that as on a course level, as violent or stupid or misguided or whatever as some people may be in your perspective, all of that came because of one tiny mistake, a misperception of reality in some moment, maybe early in their development, maybe in an infinite past life, something like that, depending on what your perspective is. And that tiny misperception about what reality is or isn't, then from that door opening into ignorance, that can open up into all kinds of manifestations of ignorance. Even our so-called maybe gentle, kind, socially responsible type of behavior is still equally ignorant if it isn't seeing reality as it is. And from one perspective, that's no different compared to the ultimate kind of reality or realization that would lead you to be liberated. It's not really different in that it's still based in ignorance than someone who's doing a lot of bad things and who's harmful and who's not nice. Except that maybe you could say that they have distanced themselves even further from being able to realize that reality because all of these negative actions are obscuring them even more. I feel like that went into a weird tangent. I hope that wasn't totally obscure, and we can talk about it later. So, or you can ask me questions about it later. But I'm going to move on a little bit. So what it's saying is that even if they do know, they don't have time, so they're not going to put any effort into trying to better themselves or trying to engage in these causes of happiness and avoiding the causes of suffering. They're not interested. They don't care. Or they procrastinate. You know, a lot of us fall into that camp. You know, a lot of us who have entered into a spiritual path, we're like, oh, I'll start meditating more seriously tomorrow. Well, I'm doing a retreat next month, so it's okay if I'm lazy right now. You know, all these kind of things. It's easy to fall into those traps of procrastination. And so even though they don't want to suffer from within the three states of mind, which are the causes of suffering, attachment, anger, and stupidity, they put all their efforts into gaining, protecting, and increasing their samsaric possessions. So basically, saying that beings don't want to suffer, they want to be happy, but because they're driven by their anger, attachment, and ignorance or stupidity, they just keep engaging in things that are going to create further causes of suffering. Thereby their wishes and their actions are perverted. So thinking with compassion for each of these sentient beings who are enduring these mistaken perceptions of the causes, harmful actions, and effects, suffering, that's the first aspect, compassion directed to sentient beings. So what it's saying is that these causes, which are these misdirected actions or thoughts, those are the causes which are going to bring about the effects of their suffering. So they're not understanding that what they're doing is going to lead them into further suffering, and they're not only engaging in the causes, but they're also experiencing the results of those causes, and we should have compassion for them because of that. And so that's the first aspect, compassion for sentient beings. That's the first of the two. The second is wisdom directed at perfect enlightenment. So it says, as for the latter aspect, wisdom directed at perfect enlightenment, you should think as follows. Now I'm practicing this virtuous activity in order for all these sentient beings who are the objects of my compassion and who have been my parents to be freed from suffering of their individual karmic appearances of the 6 classes, both of the upper and the unpleasant realms, and to attain the precious state of Buddhahood, the total liberation, which is the state of ultimate and unchanging happiness. That's a very wordy way of saying, if I were meditating, I might start my meditation with the intention, I'm now going to meditate in order to free all beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment. To unpack the words here a little bit, it says they're experiencing their own karmic appearances, their individual karmic appearances of the 6 classes. According to traditional Buddhist texts, then there's what they call 6 realms of beings, like humans, animals, hell beings, gods, demigods, hungry ghosts, all these kind of things. So when it says that they're individual karmic appearances, it means that no matter what you're perceiving, it's your individual perception. Like, we might think that we're seeing the same thing, and on a certain level of conventional kind of consensus reality, we could say that we're both seeing a table, or you're both seeing this guy named Justin talking. But like, your way of experiencing that is entirely based on your own individual conditioning. Your way of seeing or experiencing anything is entirely individual for you. So that's what it means here when it says individual karmic appearances. So basically the idea is to start off any practice with that intention. Second, the non-referential state of the main body of practice, which keeps one's roots of virtue from being destroyed by conditions. If you don't gradually abandon these dualistic appearances of samsara and nirvana, which are grasping at true existence of thoughts and characteristics, whatever you do, the roots of virtue will cause the attainment of a body of a human or God in the upper realms, but will not become the cause of attaining Buddhahood. They will also be depleted by the four causes of exhausting one's roots of virtue. So, what it's saying here is that if you basically, so this is talking about the non-referential state, not just from the simple version that I talked about, which is focusing single-pointedly, but from a state of literally being in a state which sees the nature of reality, which is beyond thinking that anything is real. That's a whole topic that we're going to explore a little bit here in a second, but I'm going to move into that slowly, step by step here. So basically, according to Buddhism, what is going to liberate you is seeing that things don't exist in the way that you think that they do, in the way that you kind of habitually perceive them to. And that seeing them in the way that you habitually perceive them to means that you're seeing things as if they independently exist, if they are permanent, independently existing, and singular. So, for example, with my sense of self, this is probably the easiest way to start this discussion. So, I think that my self is permanent. I think that there is a me who existed 10 years ago that is the same me that exists right now. But all there really is a continuation of thoughts and memories that are kind of like holding on to an idea of a me. So for example, in the traditional practices of like examining the self or finding the so-called truth of selflessness, you would do a kind of examination and go through all the aspects of what you think you are. And according to the Buddhist tradition, that is something called the five aggregates. So there is your body, your form, your feelings, your perceptions, like thinking I am this and that. Conditioning factors, which is kind of your emotions, but also a sense of identity, your name and things like that. And then your consciousness, like your way of thinking. And so when you examine in that way, what you will find is that you're not your body. If you examine, you'll find that you have my body, my arms, my head, my thoughts, my feelings, my identity. But all there is a my. But where is the me who supposedly possesses or is controlling or experiencing all this stuff? If you really do the meditation, and I'm just giving a very fast version of this, and in our programs where you would go through the meditations on this, you would do this for some months. So this is just a quick little preview of what that might be. What you will hopefully come to conclude is that this sense of I is actually just an imagination. It doesn't exist. That it's just an idea that we have of ourselves. We think that there is some singularly existing I that was born when I was born and has carried through and been here now. But that doesn't exist at all. All there is like a fixation that we have, a belief that is based in our thoughts and our identity and our body. And that goes for everything. That's just one example about the I. You could apply that same logic to a body. So like, I think there is a body. But actually there are 2 arms, 2 legs, internal organs, skin, blood, all these things. And there is like the arm of my body, the legs of my body. If I cut off my leg, I still have a body. So where is the body? All there is parts of a body and an imagined idea of something called body. And that's kind of goes for everything. And when we think that thing is there, of course I'm like speaking in contradiction to like basic human language, of course. But what it's getting at is a sense that our mind doesn't just think that there is like a conventionally existing body, which is an idea that we have of a collection of parts. We believe that there is some permanent, independently existing, independent of causes and conditions kind of thing there that is I or my body or Jessica or whatever. And because of that kind of belief system, which is almost innate, then that results in all of our afflictive emotions that create suffering. So if we can see, as it says here, if you don't gradually abandon these dualistic appearances, which are the grasping at true existence of thoughts and characteristics. So as long as we're still believing that everything's real in the way that it appears to us, which is in that way, as if things were permanent, singular, and truly existing, then we'll never overcome this cycle of creating situations which are continuing our experience of dissatisfaction and suffering. So the way to overcome that is to do all of these kind of practices which are trying to get you into a state where you're seeing things as they are. And so as long as you are still believing that things are real, you're still creating what we call karmic patterns. You're still creating habitual patterns which are going to lead you to keep experiencing things in the way that you have in the past, and which are going to keep you locked in this pattern of suffering. So, drink some water here. Then it said here, they will also be depleted by the 4 causes of exhausting one's roots of virtue. From the Vinaya. The Vinaya are the texts on ethical discipline from the Buddhist teachings. Having accumulated some roots of virtue, not dedicating or wrongly dedicating, telling others, or having regret, these are the 4 causes of exhausting. So it's saying that there are, let's say you did something good. There are a lot of ways that goodness can basically be destroyed. In terms of, so you do something good, you're hoping that that's going to create some kind of good situation within you or within your environment, within your circumstances, that's going to be somehow supportive to your future. So like, for example, in the Buddhist teachings, we often talk about that you should do a lot of virtuous things because you need merit to support your practice. And there's this kind of almost abstract idea of merit. But what it really is that when you're doing good things, you're creating a circumstance in yourself as well as in your environment of supportive causes and conditions which are going to help you to keep moving forward in that direction. So if I am being kind, if I'm speaking honestly, if I'm speaking gently, if I'm saying things that are meaningful, all of those things are going to contribute to a sense of peace of mind within myself because I know I'm being honest and decent and kind. I'm not creating the causes for paranoia and fear and disharmony and so forth within myself, but I'm also creating a circumstance where people are going to want to support me. People are going to trust me. I'm gaining and building a network of support and trust. And it's saying here that even if you've done something good, that goodness is still not really safe or something like that. That's not really it's not free from being corrupted, I guess you could say. And so let's get into here. So it says not dedicating. So it says here, without dedicating roots of virtue, they're left as neutral and will as a result be exhausted. So what that means is, let's say I do something good, and instead of dedicating that, instead of thinking that I am giving that away for the benefit of others, I just kind of hold it in a sense, or just kind of forget about it. In a certain sense, what it's saying is that there is a bit of still either laziness, that you haven't fully contributed or fully gone into the idea of this kind of idea of benefit for others or enlightenment for others, but also maybe that there's a sense of selfishness involved, like I'm going to keep this for myself. And like I want this virtue to be good for me. Because one of the senses of dedication is that you're giving it away. Okay, I did this good thing, but I'm not holding on to it. I'm not grasping at it. I'm not expecting some reward from it. Something like that. So that's kind of what is talking about the fault of not dedicating your virtue. Then it says, wrongly dedicated, they'll be the causes of samsara. So what wrongly dedicated means is you could think, okay, I did some good thing. May it be the cause of the liberation of all beings, may it cause me to become rich and famous, or something like that. And from the perspective of someone who wants to be rich and famous, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But from the perspective of someone who's trying to accomplish the state of enlightenment, the full state of enlightened Buddhahood, then that's not going to get you there. That's what the whole perspective of this is, not advice for the general person to be a nice person. This is like, if you really want to get enlightened, according to this traditional kind of sense of the Buddhist practices, then this is what's going to work and what's not going to work. So if you are dedicating your roots of virtue, you're dedicating your practices in a way that is still directed towards some kind of selfish intention, then they'll be the causes of samsara, they won't be the causes of liberation. If you proclaim to others whatever roots of virtue you've accomplished, or having previously made offerings, acts of generosity, and so forth, and then later regret them, the roots of virtue are exhausted. So then, let's say you do something good, and you start bragging about it to everyone. That's another way that kind of corrupts, whatever goodness you've done is kind of corrupted by the sense that you went off telling everyone about it. Even you can feel that in yourself. It doesn't feel good. It kind of takes something that was really pure, and it was just about you purely giving or doing something for the good of others, and brings, again, a sense of, I want to be recognized. There's a sense of me. This is still for me. And then regretting is another part of that. So we talked about this in some of the past One Community gatherings, and for those of you that weren't there, when we were talking about karma, in terms of what's going to create, when we talk about karma, a lot of times what we're talking about is habitual patterning. So if you do something, and you do something with intention, and you do something on purpose, and you know what you're doing, you willingly do it, and you do it with a powerful emotion, and at the end of that, you're rejoicing in what you've done, that's going to create a strong habitual pattern. You're more likely to repeat that type of action. Whereas if you did something maybe accidentally, and you weren't really thoughtful about who you were doing it to or who was involved, and after that you regret what you've done, it's not going to create a very strong pattern. You're less likely to repeat that type of action or thought. So the regret is considered something that can kind of eliminate something positive or negative. Like, let's say I did something really negative, but I really regret it. Like, I really recognize that was a mistake, and I really don't want to do it again. Then the power of regret will help you to not repeat that action. If, on the other hand, I did something really bad, but I'm really happy that I did something bad, like I really hurt that person and I'm happy about it, I lied and successfully got away with it, I'm really happy about that, I'm way more likely to repeat that. It's way more likely to become a habit, right? So in that way, regret, it's saying here that even if you did something good, if you later regretted it, then that kind of corrupts whatever kind of positivity or virtue there was in that good deed. Like, that could be a meditation practice, that could be an act of generosity, whatever. Like, if you give someone $100, this is an example that Ken Rinpoche uses a lot. Let's say you give someone some money to, and you have some expectation about what they're going to do with the money. Like, they told you that they needed the money for this and that, I don't know, to pay their rent. And then you find out that they used it to go on vacation or something. You might be mad at them and then regret giving them the money. That, whatever kind of benefit or virtue that there was in you just giving them the money is destroyed by the fact that you regret giving it now. If you had just given it with the pure intention, I hope this is helpful for you, whatever comes of it, I don't care. And just with that, leave it. Don't have any expectation of what they might do. Don't have any expectation of them even being thankful to you or ever returning that kindness to you. If you do that, then it's pure. It's pure and it's virtuous, and it will remain virtuous, especially if you dedicate that act of generosity to the liberation of all beings. But if you regret it for whatever reason, and that's why these practices of the Bodhisattva path are so hard. It's very contrary to our ordinary sense of human interaction. I want people to have integrity. I want them to do what they say they're going to do. But part of this practice of a bodhisattva is, for one, practicing giving and doing without expectation of a reward. And if you have any expectation that someone's going to do what you think they should do, in terms of a reaction to what you've done, that doesn't mean that you can't hold people responsible, but if you're emotionally invested in that, in a negative way, then that is a slippery slope for a bodhisattva. You can still, on a practical level, hold people responsible for doing what they say they're going to do. You might have a job, or you might have a family. You have to take care of kids, or expect something of your partner. But there has to be a way to do that without getting angry or jealous or regretful or frustrated or whatever. So that is tricky, and that's a lot of what the so-called mind training teachings are about. So this is not really the topic right now, but there are a lot of mind training practices which are about taking the loss upon yourself, giving others the victory. Like, there's so many times that we get in arguments, like, it can be very difficult for someone like myself sometimes to go home and have to deal with my parents who are very conservative politically and don't agree with a lot of the ways that I live my life. And sometimes I just have to say, you're right, that's fine, that's great. Arguing's not going anywhere, it's not getting me anywhere. Like, I've tried and failed 1,000 times. And it's only harming me to keep doing that, and it's probably harming our relationship. And at a certain point, you got to choose your battles, but also as a practice of a bodhisattva, it is kind of a very highly recommended, and in many of the traditional texts, like the eight points of mind training and so forth, to just let others win. Just give them the victory and take the loss. And that's a practice of giving up expectation. It's a practice of cutting down your pride. Anyway, that's a whole tangent about not regretting virtuous actions that you've done. So anyway, then the further it explains, so this isn't within the 4, but this is another thing that is emphasized in a lot of texts. Anger, it says anger, etc., but just think of anger, acts as the causes and conditions of depleting your roots of virtue from the Bodhicharya Avatara. 1,000 eons of whatever acts of generosity, offering to the Sugatas, etc., are all destroyed by a single thought of anger. So, they mention this in all kinds of texts, that they say, like, there's no negative action or no negative thought as powerful as anger, and there's no austerity, there's no difficult practice as beneficial as patience. So it's said, in the teachings that patience is the antidote to anger. And patience doesn't just mean stubbornly sitting there and like not getting angry because you're still angry, you're just not letting it out. But it involves a lot of techniques for how to not get angry. And there's a whole section of teachings about that. So anyway, anger is considered one of the most destructive emotions. It is the most destructive emotion, I should say. So it says, therefore, the supreme antidote for these causes meaning the causes of depleting your virtue, is the realization of the views of the Madhyamaka, that means the middle way, Mahamudra, and Mahasandhi. So these are some fancy names. They're called the 3 great ones. Maha means great in Sanskrit. So they call it Mahamadhyamaka, sometimes the great middle way. Mahamudra, the great seal. Mahasandhi, the great perfection. And so if one is not quite so trained, one should know all phenomena to be like illusions, like dreams, and like the moon in water. So this is some examples that are given for the way that someone might perceive things if they have trained themselves in the way I described before, about this absence of a truly existing self, absence of truly existing other phenomena that you experience. So through the Madhyamaka, the middle way philosophy, that is done more through analytic meditations, kind of as we have in one of our programs called Walking the Path. There's a year of calm abiding meditation and then a year of Vipassana insight meditation, which is basically what you might call Madhyamaka meditation. It is a meditation based on initially some analytic meditations, kind of examining, trying to find a truly existing self, and then meditating like in a space of trying to see its absence. And then gradually working towards seeing everything that you perceive in that way, and even your mind in that way. And so Mahamudra and Mahasandhi are just other traditions, like within the Tantric tradition, which are working towards that same goal, but with some other techniques, some other ways of getting at that same kind of realization. So saying that things are like illusions, like dreams, or like the moon and water, it says that although in the true emptiness nature of appearances of these phenomena, form, and etc., in the natural state of great equality, the space of primordially pure awareness, these mistaken perceptions or mistaken appearances are not established. To those who are not aware that these personal phenomena don't inherently exist and grasp the appearances, the conditions, and the mind, the cause, as separate, from the perspective of their confusion, from the interdependent gathering of causes and conditions, mistaken appearances advantageously arise like illusions. That was very wordy. And basically what it's saying is that in the true nature of reality, all of these things that we solidify and think of as real don't exist. However, the things that lead us to think they exist are all of these kind of causes and conditions keep on happening. So like when I say that myself doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that you can't call me Justin and I'm not going to answer you. And even if I have fully realized the absence of a truly existing self, you can still say, hey, Justin, and I would still say, what's up? It's not a negation of conventional experience of reality. It is you could say, a challenge of your innate mistaken way of perceiving things. That experience of Justin or I is something permanent, singular, and independently existing, which is the basis upon which I experience all of my suffering. So it's saying that none of these personal phenomena inherently exist. That's a key point. It's not saying that they don't exist at all. Of course, there is like a conventional experience of the coming together of causes and conditions that made it such that we could advertise a program here tonight and you showed up. If nothing existed at all, then even that wouldn't happen. There would be nothing. So Buddhism is not nihilistic, and it's not saying that things don't exist at all. It's not saying that the self doesn't exist at all, but that there is some kind of ultimate reality that if you realize it, things will no longer appear in the way that you think they do right now. And that in that experience, you'll no longer experience suffering. And that you will stop creating the causes which continue you to live in this cycle of suffering. So that's what's being said. So, though not existing and not being real, the objects of grasping, the appearing aspects of the five outer objects, forms, sounds, smells, tastes, etc., are unceasing like last night's dream. So it's saying, basically, these things that we see, they don't truly exist. They're not real in the sense of being independently existing in the way that we might think that they are. However, they keep appearing. And they use the example of a dream all the time in Buddhism because they say that you keep seeing things because of habituation. The way that we perceive things to be truly existing and independently existing is because of a habituation to an initial state of ignorance. That initial state of ignorance led us to start experiencing things as if they're separate, as if they're real, and then that just kept cascading into further and further experiences of habit. So we're like living out a habit. And in a certain level, when you think about a dream, what a dream is like whatever you have really habituated yourself to in your daytime experience, then that's what's going to appear most strongly in your dreams. And you could say, a lot of us might seem to think that, our dreams are not real, but in the dream it feels real. Like the suffering that you experience feels real, fear that you experience, lust that you feel, whatever you feel feels real. And so, according to Buddhism, they would say that there's not really much of a difference between your daytime experience of what you think is reality and your nighttime experience of a dream, because both of them are actually just the living out of habitual patterns. And the appearances, the way that you're perceiving things, is based upon all of those habituations and conditioning that have led you to experience the things in the way that you are right now. So that's why they use the example of things are like a dream or like an illusion and so forth. So, these appearances are themselves are such that without the previous coming of causes of virtue or misdeeds, they will not arise, and with them comes the unfailing dependent arising of causes and effects. Therefore, abandon your selfish thoughts and motivations and make your best efforts at reinforcing, purifying, increasing, etc., all the aspects of the path. It is crucial for that whatever Dharma we practice, it is embraced by the three noble principles. So, what it's saying is that these appearances, the things that appear to us, all of our perceptions, they don't truly exist. But, another thing to understand, and I think a lot of you that have already heard teachings about the middle way philosophy, emptiness, if you've come to some of these other teachings over the last 6 months that I've been giving, I've talked more about what that might mean. And I'm afraid for some of you that I'm rambling on, endlessly repeating myself, but I'm always afraid that there's new people in the room and I have to explain what emptiness means because it can be a big misunderstanding. Basically, if things were not empty, according to Buddhism, then they would be fixed. They would be stuck. The opposite of emptiness is what we would call, according to Buddhism, true existence. And a synonym of emptiness is interdependent or dependently existent. So things only exist in dependence upon other things. So my experience of of something is dependent upon so many causes and conditions. My experience of a self is dependent on all kinds of causes and conditions. It didn't just come out of nowhere. But when I experience or perceive anything, our kind of innate way of grasping at it is as if things exist in and of themselves, that they are not dependent on other things. And that's what we would call an experience of thinking things are real, is thinking that they exist in and of themselves, not dependent upon other factors. Like if I get angry at someone in that moment of anger, I cannot see that that person's decision was based upon their fundamental ignorance and their way of being brought up and their lack of education and or just that they had a bad day and in that moment they were kind of upset. I can't see any of that. All I see is he's an asshole and that's real. And in my mind, that's like some truly independently existing him that really exists and is really what I think he is. I really think he's a jerk. And all of that appears to me as if it's true, independently existing, and permanent, like he's always going to be that way. And that's where that trigger of emotion comes. If I were to see all of the complexity of what that person is and what they're bringing to that situation, then I would not experience the emotional reaction of anger to them. That's what Buddhism's saying. What emptiness is to see that there isn't some truly existing person in that situation, or even truly existing situation, that could lead you to an experience of anger. And if you were to see that, then you wouldn't experience suffering, basically. So that's a very, very brief way of talking about what emptiness is. And if you want to know more about it, I would suggest, Jess or Rachel, could you put the link to that video from the Awam Garden of a Thousand Buddhas YouTube channel? There's a really great whole separate teaching on that, and then maybe the Perfection of Wisdom one from last time or whatever that was. Okay, so the last bit here, there's still a bit left, and I feel like I'm talking at length. I'm doing good on time? Okay, good. I always feel like I'm running out of time, and I think I always have more time than I think I do. All right, third is the conclusion of dedication, and I guess if I have more time, I should probably talk about emptiness more, but we'll come back to it with the questions. Okay, great. Third is the conclusion of the dedication which increases the roots of virtue evermore. From the sutra requested by Sagaramati. Just as a drop of water that falls into the ocean isn't exhausted until the ocean is exhausted, virtues thoroughly dedicated to enlightenment will not be exhausted until the attainment of enlightenment. So, they often give the example of dedication of merit being like putting all of your good deeds into a bank that they've secured, that they won't get lost, they won't get stolen, they won't get destroyed by your negative emotions and things like that. That once something's been dedicated, once you've given it away, that it's safe. It's going to contribute as a cause to your enlightenment ultimately. So it says here there are two divisions to the dedication. First, from the gathering, that's the name of a short sutra. The victor has said that having a reference to wholesome dharmas is just like eating food that's been mixed with poison. The three, the object of offering, the action of offering, the place or person to offer to, or the three thoughts of self, other, and giving are the three spheres. So this is a complex thing. There's a Buddhist topic that we call the three spheres, or what it means to be without the three spheres. And so the three spheres mean believing that there is, like in an act of generosity, believing that there is a truly existing me who's giving something, that there's a truly existing act of generosity or thing that I'm giving, and a truly existing recipient of that action. If you had that kind of fixation, then along with that comes all the range of ego about giving, expectation of a reward for giving, belief that there is some person who's going to be benefited from that, and then belief that they should do something specific with that. All of the kind of stickiness and entanglement of emotion comes in as soon as you believe that there is something beyond a coming together of causes and conditions that is creating a me and a them and an action and all that. As soon as you believe that those things truly exist, then that is what it's saying here. It is like a poisonous dedication. So, and what that means is it's still good to do, but it's still going to create a situation still within the cycle of suffering. And that is, there are ups and downs within the cycle of suffering. So they could say that doing good things, but still believing in the reality of those things would bring you to a very fortunate circumstance, but still within the cycle of samsara. So like if you believe in this pattern of future lives, let's say I do a lot of good stuff in this life, but I never try and even understand this nature of reality, this emptiness nature, then all of those virtuous things are going to lead me to have a really good experience in my future life. I'll be born as a human again who's wealthy and has a good family that supports them and blah, 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 or maybe in a God realm or something like that. But if you have done the same kind of virtues, but with the second point of these 3 points, that you have done them within the perspective of seeing their absolute nature, seeing them being free from any kind of inherent existence, and then dedicated them in this pure way where you're seeing them without a truly existing me as the person dedicating merit, a truly existing sentient beings who are suffering, who need to have something dedicated to them, and a truly existing act of dedication or a truly existing virtue that I've done, then all of those same practices that previously would have led you to take rebirth in samsara in a fortunate circumstance would instead become the causes of enlightenment. That's what it's saying. So, the 3, the object of offering, the action of offering, the place or person to offer to, or the 3 thoughts of self, other, and giving are the 3 spheres. Similarly, there are 3 for tolerance. This is tolerated, I tolerate, or I tolerate for this purpose. In the context of the conclusion of dedication as well, there are the roots of virtue to be dedicated, those beings to whom we dedicate, and the purpose of our dedication. If our dedication is contaminated with the stains of these cognitive obscurations, the grasping at the true existence toward these concepts of the 3 spheres, it is a poisonous dedication. So, second, and that all connects to the exact same discussion of what it means to do virtue if you're doing virtue that is still within the perspective of seeing that things truly exist, within your ordinary unenlightened state, but still doing virtuous things. They're still going to lead to good results, but they're not going to lead to your enlightenment, is the point. So, second is the poison-free dedication, which is embraced by the wisdom that realizes the absence of true existence, that the 3 spheres appear without any inherent existence, like the moon in the water. So, when the moon appears in the water, the moon didn't become water. It's not really there in the water, but because of the reflective nature of water and the light coming off of the moon and the sun, there is an appearance of a moon in the water. And they're saying that basically all phenomena are like that. Nothing truly exists the way it appears to us, but because of all these causes and conditions and our mind's capacity to reflect and to experience things in that way, we see things in a particular way and then we think that they're real. Just in the same way that someone who saw a reflection in a mirror for the first time ever could be tricked into thinking that there's someone else in front of them. You know, we're tricked into believing that everything we see exists truly as it appears to us, but it's actually just circumstantial coming together with all of the habitual patterns that we bring and the kind of nature or reflective and luminous kind of ability of our mind to see and experience things leads us into a diluted experience of thinking things are real. So, there are also 2 divisions to this poison-free dedication, which is completely 3 of the 3 spheres, the authentic one and the corresponding one. The first is, as it said in the expression of emptiness with the essence of compassion, it is the realization of suchness, the natural state of dharmata of all phenomena, which is free from birth and cessation with the arising of the expression of bodhicitta in dedication and aspiration. So what that means is that the first is the authentic dedication free of the 3 spheres, the authentic poison free. That means you've actually realized that. So the second is going to be, okay, I haven't actually realized that, but I aspire towards that. So how can I connect with that kind of energy? So the first is like, okay, if you actually did experience the true nature of reality, then they say that the true expression of an experience, an actual experience of emptiness, is a natural expression of compassion for others. Because if you experience that nothing is real in the way that I think it was, or that I thought it was, and the only reason I was suffering is because I thought it was real, then it's really easy to see that everyone else is suffering for the same reason. And then the natural expression of your experience of that is to see, oh man, everyone's suffering needlessly. Basically, everyone's suffering is based on a basic misunderstanding about the nature of reality. And so then they say that, they say emptiness with the essence of compassion is a common expression in the tradition, which means that emptiness isn't a blank kind of void absence. It is this experience that things don't exist as singular, permanent, independent, but rather that emptiness doesn't invalidate another person's conventional experience of suffering, but rather it validates it. It shows you why that would happen. So one's own experience of emptiness leads one to be liberated from an experience of suffering, but in that same moment automatically gives rise to compassion for others by seeing that they're suffering needlessly. So that would be saying that if you have the actual realization of suchness as a way of talking about the nature of reality, then that would naturally arise as compassion, and then in that state of this union of emptiness and compassion, you make this dedication, something like that. Second, it says, for ordinary beings who lack the wisdom that is free of the concepts of the three spheres, so for people who haven't trained themselves to that extent to see the emptiness nature of themselves as a dedicator of merit, some kind of actual merit being dedicated, or merit, or the dedication of merit, or the lack of true existence of beings to whom you're dedicating, if you don't have that level of realization, then it says in the preparation, so this is going to talk about, for someone who doesn't have that realization, how you can practice all three of these principles, because all three of them could be connected to a higher level of realization or a more basic level of practice. So in the preparation, you adjust your attitude and hold it with a kind heart. So you still try and adjust that attitude of, I wish for all beings to be free from suffering and brought to the state of enlightenment. But the way this can connect back to what was just said is that for most of us, until we train ourselves to a certain extent, until we have a genuine experience of emptiness, our even experience of a basic attitude of bodhicitta is still contrived. It's still like, it's still just a concept that we're kind of aspirationally hoping to generate. We're still having to convince ourselves, you could say. Whereas if you've had the genuine experience of emptiness, then it's no longer contrived. It's a natural expression of your being or of your realization to have that wish for the liberation of others. Rather than at a more fundamental, more basic level of practice, you're still having to kind of talk yourself into it. Like you've convinced yourself with some logic or reasoning that everyone is deserving of happiness or something like that, or that there's some good reason that their beings are equally deserving of happiness and that it would be great for them to be liberated or something like that. It's still a little bit of a game or a bit of a, I don't know, technically like the word in the tradition is it's still a contrived state of mind. And once you have had that deeper experience, it becomes uncontrived. Like the nature of bodhicitta or the attitude of bodhicitta becomes uncontrived bodhicitta. So, in the main body of practice, so this is saying again, if you don't have that wisdom free of the concepts of the three spheres, if you haven't realized or gained a deeper experience of emptiness, you should focus your attention on whatever virtuous activity you're doing without distraction. So, until you have gotten into the teachings about emptiness, if you're only practicing at a level of like shamatha, don't try and convince yourself that everything's emptiness. Just focus single-pointedly on like, for example, when you're doing your shamatha practice, don't start trying to think about emptiness. Just focus on your shamatha practice. Shamatha practice is in and of itself, by nature, just single-pointedly focusing on an object. There's no content. You shouldn't be thinking about other things while you're doing that. And if you haven't received teachings about emptiness, you should aspire to do that. But when you're receiving teachings and when you're trying to do other practices, don't try and think about emptiness. Just try and focus on what you're doing single-pointedly without distraction. So, and then it says, for the concluding dedication, you think, symbolized by this present virtue with my mind, I take up all the contaminated and uncontaminated roots of virtue gathered in all the three times by myself and others. And just as all the Buddhas of the three times and their heirs, the Bodhisattvas, have dedicated, I also thoroughly dedicate these merits for the benefit of all mother sentient beings. So, a lot of times when we dedicate merits, there are different dedication prayers that don't just say, I dedicate the merit of this meditation that I did. It's that I take the meditation that I've just done and I take that as a placeholder and I imagine that I'm dedicating every good thing that's ever been done by anyone ever. Something like that. And, it's a way of combining whatever power of virtue or goodness that you've done with the amassed goodness and virtue of everyone who's doing anything good, basically, and just kind of like trying to incorporate that and make what you've done even more powerful. So, and what it says is that when it says, just as the Buddhas of the three times and their heirs have dedicated, I also thoroughly dedicated. So one thing that it's saying is that just as they did is also saying, just as they did, as the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas did, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas did it in a pure way, without reference to the three spheres, without believing in the true existence of this act that I've done, or myself as the person who's dedicating this merit, or living beings who are suffering who I wish that this merit could benefit. So by kind of merging our dedication with theirs, and by saying I want to dedicate just how they did, then that is a way of kind of connecting to the poison-free aspect of dedication, they're saying. So even if you haven't fully realized it, it's said that by reciting that type of prayer and imagining your dedication in that way, it's a way of connecting to that and making sure that your dedication of merit is going to be a cause of enlightenment and not a cause for further experience in samsara. So there is a particular dedication prayer that we often recite that says, just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Sambandhabhadra too, all these merits I now dedicate to training and following in their footsteps. So that's what's said here. It says, then within that state recite the dedication from the confession of downfalls, just as the Buddha Bhagavans of the past, etc., or the aspiration from excellent conduct, just as the brave Manjushri knew, etc. That's that prayer. It's just referring to this prayer. It said that reading these words counts as the dedication free of the three spheres. So even if you haven't fully realized yourself, by reciting that kind of prayer with that kind of intention, it said that you merge your intention or your dedication with theirs, and that kind of counts or works in the same way. So then it says, Kato Kempo Ngawang Pel Sambo. So this is a long way of saying Kempo Ngakchung is his short name. He's the one who wrote the Guide to the Words of My Perfect Teacher, famous text on the preliminary practices in our tradition. So he said, for all the Mahayana practices, whether sutra or tantra, and in order to attain the perfect state of Buddhahood, you don't need more than the three noble principles, and it is such that with less than these three, practice is incomplete. Dokyen Seishi Dorji, another famous teacher in our tradition, he said, without being embraced with these three noble principles, these virtues will become virtues conducive to merit, which are the causes for mere attainment of the states of humans and gods. So that's just as I said before, that if you haven't joined your practice with these three noble principles of the dedication of merit, the non-referential state in the main body of practice, and the dedication of merit, that everything that you do that's virtuous is still going to be creating habitual patterns to keep you in samsara, even though they will be good circumstances, you know. So that's what's called virtues conducive to merit. If they are embraced meaning if your practice is containing these three principles, then they are virtues conducive to liberation, the causes of enlightenment and Buddhahood. Therefore, it's important not to mistake this key point. Similarly, in the beginning, middle, and end of practicing the holy Dharma, or in the preparation, main body, and conclusion, that only the noble principles will do was something that not just said once, but was a primary teaching from the mouth of my own lineage master, the unmatched Zagyal Khenchen Bumthar Dorje Chang. Therefore, with my own certainty as the basis, I arranged these notes by gathering the points from all the brief and extensive instruction texts of the Longchen Yingtik preliminary practices, composed by a Kampa Ngakpa of the final age, Jimmy Namgyel. May it be virtuous, may it be virtuous, may it be auspicious. So, that was, as I said, a text which was written by one of my teachers in India. His name is Jigme Namgyal Rinpoche. So his main teacher was this Lama named Khenchen Bumthar. Zagyal is the name of their monastery, so it said Zagyal Khenchen Bumthar. And that concludes the text.